we're live. Welcome again to another episode of Professor and the Idiot. I'm Nick Wolfinger.
And I am Dalton Nick.
And today, we're very pleased to have another guest. David Lay is a clinical psychologist in Albuquerque, New Mexico. He's the executive director of a large outpatient community mental health and substance abuse program there. He's a regular contributor to Psychology Today and the author of several books, mostly concerned with porn.
Well, concerned with sexuality in general.
Okay. Concerned with sex.
Yeah, concerned with sex. I mean, most of my public writing has been around sexuality. On Psychology Today, I write a fair bit about general mental health issues. As a result of my, I actually started working with sex offenders when I got into, working with clinical psychology kind of practice. And a few years ago, branched out into working more with alternative kind of sexual populations, swingers, polyamorous folk, BDSM and kink and such like that. And I've now been grandfathered in as a board-certified sex therapist. But that kind of happened on the side. I also, here in New Mexico, I do a lot of very traditional mental health kind of work, substance use, traditional behavioral health, and I'm very well known in the state for that. Outside New Mexico, I'm very well known for my stance on porn and sex addiction and all that good stuff.
Certainly. That's how I first came in contact with you on Twitter. While we're here today. I should have added on the introduction that most important, David is a jiu-jitsu black belt, trains at Jackson Wink, the world famous mixed martial arts camp in Albuquerque. And so since we're grapplers and that's how Dalton and I first met.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, we have a lot of grappling to talk about at some point.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I am incredibly lucky. I mean, Albuquerque, New Mexico and Albuquerque have their issues, but right now we're sort of the hub for MMA in a lot of ways. And I started training with Gracie Baja Jiu-Jitsu. I guess it's probably been about 13 or 14 years ago now. I was a wrestler back in high school and did that for a long time. Didn't do it in college because there wasn't any I got more money for academics. But about 13 or 14 years ago, my son was, he did a Gracie Baja Jiu-Jitsu kind of little summer camp sort of thing. And he was, then afterwards he kept doing it. And I was taking him to classes and I said, he was 12 or 13 at the time. And I said, man, this looks like a lot of fun. Would it be okay if I did it? And he goes, yeah. So it was the best father-son thing he and I have ever done. I mean, from a Papa gorilla kind of thing, yeah. I think that there is something incredibly healthy involved in choking out your son.
The closest I ever came, since I'm childless, is as a professor, is accidentally dropping a student with a head kick.
Yeah, I have now had some patients that I roll with, and that's an interesting kind of question. Is it therapeutic to submit them or therapeutic to let them submit you? I don't think anybody has a great answer to that question. My son kind of stopped doing it. He got interested in being a teenager. He got his blue belt and moved on. And I just kept doing it. It's one of the healthiest things in my life. I train at least 3 or 4 times a week. And, I've had my black belt now probably for 3 or 4 years under Roberto Alencar-Tusa, who, got his black belt direct from, Carlos Gracie Jr. And, there's just nothing else in my life where I get that kind of stress management, that kind of escape from, the real world. My agency has a budget of like $6 million, and I've got about 100 staff. And so, there are just a fuck ton of, issues that are on my mind all the time. Yep. But when somebody is trying to choke you, you can't think about human resources issues. It's life or death, and it really is one of the healthiest things in my life. Keeps me sane. My staff know where I am and when I'm training, and they know not to bother me. And they all laugh when I show up with black eyes.
Did you know what you wanted to study in college when you were in high school? How did you get into the field you're in?
Wow. No, absolutely not. I mean, I had not the slightest clue. My daughter's 18 right now, and she's going to college, and she has put so much thought and effort into what she wants to study and where she wants to go, and she worries so much about it. I was just like, My family's originally from Tennessee. I've never really lived there, but my dad said, maybe University of Mississippi would be a good school. And I said, okay. And I applied there. They gave me a whole bunch of scholarship money. And I was like, okay, I guess that's where I'm going. I applied to one school, and that was it. And then my first semester, I took a class on philosophy, an intro to philosophy class. And I just loved it. I loved the thinking about thinking and the abstract kind of exploration of ideas and stuff. And I loved it. But my dad, who's a colonel in the Army, he was not thrilled with me studying philosophy. And he kind of kept saying, I looked in the newspaper, there's no jobs for philosopher. Huh. I said, well, they're there, but they're under landscaping and fast food. I thought it was funny. He did not. So towards the end of my college career, I figured out that Dad was kind of right. There weren't a lot of jobs. So I crammed in an extra degree in psychology. And then my girlfriend was from Albuquerque at the time. And so I was out here, and I realized I did not know what to do after college. So I talked my way into the PhD program in clinical psych here. And I only found out really kind of after the fact that what I had done was almost impossible. But it worked out, and I loved it. I've ended up being really good at it. It's really great. It's a neat place for me to make a difference with people. But no, I had absolutely no idea. I did know I always wanted to write a book. I'm a big bookworm, and so I always wanted to write a book. And so my first book, Insatiable Wives, was, this big kind of fulfillment of that desire out of nowhere.
Tell Dalton what the book's about.
Oh, so my first book is called Insatiable Wives, Women Who Stray and the Men Who Love Them. And it came about because back in like 2007 or so, I was clinically depressed. I was banging my head against the wall with managed care and state bureaucracy and corporate politics and everything. I was eating me alive. And I needed something that I could do that was self-directed. And so I'd been working with alternative sexuality populations for a while. And so I put out a little survey about people that were in consensually non-monogamous relationships, polyamorous and swingers and such like that. At the time, there wasn't a lot of research about them. And I never published that study, but out of that survey, I met these two couples who lived the hot wife or the cuckold lifestyle. And this is where the wife goes off and has sex with other men with the husband's enthusiastic encouragement and support. And when I first met these couples, I thought that's fucking crazy. This can't be healthy. The neat thing was these first two couples were remarkably healthy. They'd been married 20 and 30 years. They had decades-long careers, successful families. I mean, really, by every measure, these were very healthy people. And I realized that even though I'm a pretty open, philosophically minded guy, a lot of moral bias around female sexuality and monogamy had intruded into my clinical thinking without me noticing. And so I looked at the literature, and there was nothing published about these kinds of couples. And I said, well, remember, I'm depressed. I'm looking for a project. So I said, well, I always wanted to write a book. And so I travel a lot for business. I'd post ads on Craigslist looking for these couples. This was before they took the personals ads off Craigslist. And they would send me naked pictures of the wife, and I'd say, thank you very much. She's lovely. but I'm just interested in talking with you and understanding how you do this. And along the way, I'm reading everything I can: evolutionary psychology, monogamy, female sexuality. I'm really giving myself the education around sexuality that every therapist should have, and most therapists don't get, unfortunately. And at the end of it, I had a book, and because nothing had been published about it, and it was this salacious kind of sort of sexy sort of topic, I had a contract really quick, and it sort of kicked me off on this kind of second sort of career that I've got now, where I do a lot of public speaking, I do a lot of advocacy, I do a lot of media around the way that mental health and behavioral health does exactly what I did, which is allows morality to intrude into our clinical thinking, our diagnosis, and our treatment. You know, psychology doesn't give a shit if you're monogamous or not. Morality does. And it was making some of those distinctions that helped me realize that mental health, you know, is doing in a lot of ways right now the same stuff that we did in the 1990s with the satanic ritual abuse panic.
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah.
It was fucking crazy.
Yeah, and so I've become an advocate for getting sexual morality out of mental health treatment.
I think that's great. Personally, I'm all in favor of people practicing whatever sexual lifestyle they want. I'm in a monogamous relationship now, but I have been in different kinds of arrangements in the past. But the sociologist in me says, is that good for society if everyone is fucking everyone else's wife?
It's not an either or, you know, it's not a black and white issue. And I think that, Jordan Peterson famously, pissed everybody off with the argument about enforced monogamy. And his point has some justification, that monogamous societies have lower rates of violent crime than polygamous societies because horny, lonely young guys who can't get laid get in trouble and cause crime. Getting those guys married helps them be healthier, live longer, and be more social, more pro-social. The thing is that if we as a society simply adopted, non-monogamy, I still think only around 10 to 15% of people would pursue it. Most people find that monogamy, or at least serial monogamy, works best for them because, a dyad is somewhat more stable and somewhat less more drama prone than having multiple people in the relationship.
Yeah.
But the problem is that there are people for whom monogamy just doesn't work, and trying to force them into monogamy makes things worse, makes them unhealthy and unhappy, makes them more prone to infidelity, etc. And so I think what's neat right now is that we have more options. We have more ability for people to do what I call, designing their relationship based upon a better understanding of themselves. Unfortunately, we have a situation right now where, you're 25, 26, and you fall in love with this girl, and you have crazy hot sex with her. You can't imagine being attracted to anybody else. You can't imagine ever being with anybody else.
Just wait.
And so you get married, and then a couple years down the road, things change. And that change is something we're not educating people about. We're not helping them to understand that that's normal, and we're not helping young guys like you, Dalton, to figure out how to negotiate this stuff early on. And what I say to guys and girls too, women as well, is that if you're not made for monogamy, you shouldn't be making a monogamous agreement. But we don't help people to understand when monogamy is not fit for them, And we don't help them understand that just because you're not monogamous doesn't mean you're broken. It doesn't mean there's something wrong with you. That, unfortunately, is some of that morality, because we treat infidelity like a fucking disease, and it's not.
So that change you talked about, is that something you would say happens to most men, or just the non-monogamous type that you're talking about? That change after a few years.
Yeah.
Or what causes that, so to speak?
Well, so it's kind of across an average. It appears to be more significant in heterosexual relationships, that around about 2 years there is a decline in sexual frequency. It's interesting. Lesbian relationships have the steepest decline in sexual frequency.
Lesbian bed death.
Yeah, is what they kind of call it. Lesbians kind of shack up really quick and then stop having sex. Heterosexual couples, there's a decline in sexual frequency over time, typically around 2 years. Interestingly, gay male couples show almost no decline in sexual frequency across the duration of their relationship. There is increasing kind of evidence that women show some of this significant kind of challenge with monogamy and maintaining sexual interest, sexual excitement in a long-term kind of relationship as well. A lady named Wednesday Martin just published a neat book called Untrue that's about female struggle with fidelity as well. And some of this comes out of the Coolidge principle. The story goes that Calvin. What?
Oh, go on. Sorry.
Yeah, the story goes that Calvin Coolidge, former president, was touring a chicken farm with his wife, and the couple was separated, and they were talking to the president and first lady about the mating kind of farming practices, and the farmers told the first lady that that they had one rooster. They could really only have one rooster, and that it had sex all day. And she says, "Now wait a minute, this male has sex more than one time a day?" And they said, "Yes." And she said, "Well, would you tell the president that?" Because apparently the president could only get it up one time a day. Being president is not easy. Come on, people. But they went to the president and told him that, and he said, "Now wait a minute, is that with one female chicken?" And he goes, and the farmers go, no, it's with all the different female chickens all over the farm. And he says, "Well, tell the first lady that." Because men respond very powerfully to sexual novelty, and we show sexual boredom at higher levels than women do. And this is one thing that pornography provides to men in monogamous marriages, is a way to safely fulfill that desire for novelty without cheating on your wife, unless your wife is one of the people who thinks that watching porn is cheating.
I'm totally with you on that, about the usefulness of porn for couples, and I find sort of inexplicable that some women think it's cheating to look at porn.
There was neat research by a guy from Florida, and he just last year he compared American respondents to European respondents, particularly in Spain, and he showed that in Americans, being religious, female, having low self-esteem, and being single currently, predicted that they would be more likely to view porn as cheating, watching porn as cheating. But in Europe, none of those characteristics really held. And I wrote the author, and he said, Europeans just don't take sex or religion as seriously as Americans do. And I think there's something there to listen to. I think that one of the issues is that we treat sex as special, and it is. It's also not. It is a human behavior just like any other human behavior. And when we treat it as special, we're letting morality kind of drive a lot of our decisions.
But it is special, right? I mean, it's special on any number of levels, from the reproduction of the species to how it makes us feel to how it connects people.
And this, my second book is called The Myth of Sex Addiction. And, there's this interesting kind of thing that we treat sexual desires as though they're uncontrollable. But, I pretty regularly have the desire to kill people. But
same here. Most people do.
Yeah, but nobody has ever allowed me to diagnose myself with murder addiction. But we treat the desire for sex as though it is some special, powerful kind of urge. And is it special? Sure, it's unique. But is it different from anger? Is it different from sadness? It's a feeling. And I think that where we go wrong is that we don't teach people to acknowledge and understand these feelings. The only sex education most people in our country and the United Kingdom and Canada are getting is abstinence-only education. And and now we give them the internet. Then we give them iPhones, and they, and they can put the hookup apps on their phone, and they've got access to all the porn in the world that they were never trained to understand or manage these feelings in themselves. A friend of mine told me that when she was in 8th grade sex education in Germany, the teacher gave all the students a homework assignment to go home and masturbate. I can't imagine that in a U.S. Now, granted, when I was in 8th grade, I was masturbating instead of doing my homework. If that had been my homework, I would have gotten an A.
Yeah. Likewise.
That seems a little weird to me, I'm not going to lie, for a teacher telling you to do that. What if the teacher told you to go home and meditate? What if the teacher told you to go home and savor your food? What if the teacher told you to go home and exercise? Again, it feels weird, Dalton, because we're treating sex as special. No, I just think, like, if that was my kid, I'd be like, well, I don't know what this teacher's inner thoughts are, and I don't know, it's just what if this teacher's a creep and he's telling my daughter to go home and touch herself? Yeah. Seems a little weird.
It seems a little weird because of our intuitive distrust of sex. And people who are sexual.
Yeah, well, I don't think there's a problem in saying there's nothing wrong with it or educating kids, but telling them to go do that seems a little much to me.
But they're probably already doing it.
Well, that's their choice.
And you can't police the teacher's thoughts. I mean, every teacher is thinking every terrible thing about their students.
And here's the thing. In the Netherlands and Germany, countries that have more sophisticated sex education strategies like this. I mean, you can go on YouTube and you can watch these sex education videos from Scandinavia where they are showing second graders what nude adults look like. And it flips the shit out of me. But here's the thing. Those countries have lower rates of teen pregnancy. They have lower rates of STD transmission, and they have lower rates of sexual assault because we're teaching people to understand and integrate their sexuality as opposed to treating it as though it's something outside themselves. What I say oftentimes is the only time we let ourselves think about sex is when we're turned on. And when we're turned on, we're kind of stupid because we're horny. We need to think about sex and think about what kind of sexual being we want to be when we're not turned on, that's when we can now integrate it with our values and our ideas and learn to make good decisions.
Persuaded, Dalton?
Isn't Germany known for like being the capital of shit porn?
Well, isn't that interesting that Germany and Japan have some of the most kind of extraordinary kind of extreme porn. Japan, for instance, violent extreme porn and anime and even all of the weird kind of pedophilia stuff that's in a lot of Japanese anime, and yet they have far lower rates of sexual violence than the United States. So thinking about these ideas doesn't actually make them happen. In fact, thinking about these ideas and normalizing dialogue about them may actually prevent them.
We've certainly seen rates of sexual assault in this country plummet over the last 20 years, just as internet porn developed.
Isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Well, I'm on board with everything you're saying, other than the teacher telling a to go home and touch themselves. Everything else, yeah, I'm on board. The pictures.
I'm not gonna lie, it gives me some wiggies, but here in New Mexico, and we actually have, it's not abstinence only education, and yet my daughter brought home her sex ed kind of pamphlets and information that she was given, and in the stuff that they're giving out, it said things like watching too much porn causes sexual abuse, that watching too much porn, that pornography has an effect on the brain like heroin. None of these things are true, and in fact are completely contradicted by evidence. So what I'd be interested in is sex education that is accurate and less morally driven.
Yeah, for sure.
Maybe we'll look back on that in 50 years the same way we watch the movie Reefer Madness today.
Oh, yeah. In 1956, I think, the Catholic Church funded a film called Pages of Death. It's on YouTube. You can watch it. It's hysterical. And it's this teenage kid who gets arrested for killing a teenage girl. And the film blames it on pornographic magazines, which were available at the time without age limits. And that film and the Catholic Church's activity led to most of the modern restrictions that we have on pornography. And yet, at the same time as this is going on, how many Catholic priests were sexually abusing kids? And how much sexual scandal and abuse was happening in the Catholic Church? I think we get distracted by other people's sexuality and trying to control other people's sexuality, as opposed to focusing on understanding and making good decisions for ourselves.
I'm all with you on trying to detach the morality from it, especially insofar as we do that in America. So my thought about porn addiction is always that it's something like alcohol. Like the overwhelming majority of users don't have a problem with it. I mean, every guy I know, with the exception of Brad Wilcox, looks at porn occasionally. And I don't think any of them are addicts. But I've also, from therapists, have received some indications that addiction, or at least compulsion, seems possible. I just think it's very rare. Is that a reasonable take?
This will sound like a weaselly science clause, okay?
That's how science is.
Yeah. The subjective experience of difficulty with sexual self-control does appear to be somewhat common. About 10% of people, maybe as high as 12, will report that they sometimes have difficulty controlling their sexual desires or controlling their use of pornography. Okay. However, when we look at these people who report that they're having difficulty controlling their sex or their porn, they're actually not. They don't use any more pornography than anybody else does. they feel worse about it.
Oh, interesting.
And so then when we try and understand, well, why do they feel worse about it? The number one predictor of identifying as a porn addict is not how much porn you watch, but being from a religious household. Growing up with moral attitudes against pornography. And now, remember, you're a person who was not taught anything about sexuality. Yeah. Now you can jump on your phone and watch all the porn you want and feel great while you're doing it, and then guilty and shitty afterwards. Now, the interesting thing is, the more religious you are, the harder you try to stop yourself from watching porn. Right. So right now, don't think of a naked white elephant. And if you do, you're a dirty, rotten pervert. And so everybody listening just thought of a naked white elephant.
I'm still thinking about it.
Absolutely. Sexy buggers.
Such a long trunk.
And, yeah, there you go. The thing is, when we work to suppress thoughts of sex, it actually makes those thoughts of sex more frequent. It makes them more frequent and stronger. And what's interesting is that the more people work to make thoughts of sex or pornography go away, the worse they feel about themselves, even if they don't watch porn. Now, there's another interesting group that also is more likely to identify as feeling out of control of their porn use, and that is men who are sexually unsatisfied in their relationships. Being sexually unsatisfied in your relationship means you're going to do what? It means you're going to jerk off. And most male use of pornography involves masturbation, 90 to 95%. So we're talking actually here about masturbation. We're not actually talking about pornography. And what we're talking about is people who have sexual fantasies or sexual interest or sexual desires that they kind of wish they didn't have. So that when people identify as being addicted to sex or addicted to porn, they are asking for help. They are saying, I've got these sexual interests and these sexual desires that I feel like I shouldn't have. I can't control them. I need help. I want to help those people. But the problem's not the sex. The problem's not the porn. The problem is in the person in terms of their values and ideas and beliefs around pornography and sex. For instance, many people who grow up in more conservative kinds of religions and households view same-sex desires as being unhealthy or sinful. It's not by accident that gay and bi men are at 3 times the rate of being labeled sex addicts, especially when they grow up in religious conservative households.
I'm reminded of something very sad that happened about 20 years ago. A couple of different guys killed themselves, one on the steps of a Mormon temple because they were gay and they were Mormon and they couldn't reconcile.
Yeah, I mean, suicide in Utah, especially teen suicide related to sexuality issues, is absolutely through the roof. I mean, there's quite a crisis about it. Utah is still one of the only states that mandates abstinence-only education, has one of the highest teen STI transmission rates in the country. And Utah is, interestingly, one of the highest consuming porn states and has the highest number of porn and sex addiction treatment programs in the country.
I mean, I could certainly see the number of programs in Utah just as a response to the Mormon church not to.
I mean, yeah, a group brought me out to Salt Lake City a couple of years ago to give a talk on these issues, and I was scared shitless. I mean, I thought I was going to get lynched. When I did the talk, I was completely coated in butter underneath my clothes. Not a kinky thing, but people told me that was the best way to get tar and feathers off. Because I was, but interestingly, when I talked to folks, and it was a pretty large audience, mostly Mormon, they said, David, we don't have language to talk about these issues the way you do. They said, you talk about, ethical pornography use. I talk about sexual integrity. I talk about personal responsibility around our sexual and erotic desires. They said, we're not taught to think about these things that way. We're not even taught to talk about these things. And it made me realize that the language around these issues are one of the ways that we can help people. It's why I've said, we need to stop talking about porn addiction and start talking about some of the issues that are really going on here to help people turn the issue from being about porn to being about me. So now I can better understand myself and why this feels so difficult to control. That's how we move this forward.
I think that's really helpful. And unlike many interventions that people propose, that's something that's possible. That's doable. That's teachable.
Yeah. And, and the research actually shows that using cognitive behavioral strategies like what I'm talking about to help people with these struggles work. There's no evidence that treating these things as an addiction does help. There's absolutely no evidence that treating these as porn addiction or sex addiction helps people gain control or changes their behavior.
So I really wanted to ask you about this because this is affecting somebody very, very close in my life. I don't want to name names or get too descriptive, but this person recently started listening to this podcast. But this person has a history of cheating on their girlfriends. And I do believe that this person loves their girlfriends, but they just can't seem to stop. And recently, he told me that he was a recovering sex addict. Do you think for scenarios like that is most likely that person is just not meant to be monogamous and isn't necessarily a sex addict?
I think that's one answer. I think that there's a lot. Overwhelmingly, about 90% of people who identify as sex addicts or get labeled as sex addicts, overwhelmingly male, have a major mental health issue, typically depression or anxiety. And oftentimes they are using sex, masturbation, or sex with other people as a way to feel better. Because that's one of the things sex is really fucking good at. It really does make us feel better.
At least until those guys shoot their loads.
Until we get caught, right? And realize we just had sex with somebody we're not supposed to, or we just did something sexually we had agreed we wouldn't do, etc. So when I work with these guys, and I work with lots and lots of people who come to me who've been in sex addiction treatment for a long time, and yet they're still struggling. I do a couple of things. First, I don't shame them for struggling with monogamy, because the more we shame people for this, the harder it is to control, the harder it is to understand themselves. When we shame people about these issues, we just teach them to hate themselves and hate that aspect of themselves. Instead, I try to focus on what are the good things about you? What are the good things that we can build up, and focus more on those. Secondly, I try to look at what is the sex doing for you. Now, some people have a very high sensation-seeking tendency. They are people who do Brazilian jiu-jitsu. There are people who skydive. There are people who are drag racers, who they need more excitement in their life to really feel satiated.
I can understand that.
And those people struggle more with monogamy, because the sensation and excitement also works in sex as well. So for those people who, they really crave lots of sexual excitement, and, they're interested in anal sex, or they're interested in group sex, or they're interested in swinging, it's difficult for those people to be in a monogamous relationship with somebody who doesn't share their sexual interests. That's one thing. Secondly, I try to look at, again, what is the sex doing for them? Is it a way for them to feel like a king? Because in ancient days, powerful men got to have all the women and the harems that they wanted. Interestingly, poor men and men who are struggling financially cheat more than wealthy men. Because sex is a way to escape from some of the burdens of poverty. I also see men who cheat because they're angry at their wife or girlfriend, and they don't really feel like they can tell her what they're angry about. or they cheat because they have sexual needs that are not being met by their wife or girlfriend, and they don't know how to negotiate that.
Yeah. It comes back to the education. People don't know how to make sexual requests.
And unfortunately, I mean, Dalton, it's a great example because lots and lots of those guys are out there, and it's really, really easy to say, oh, well, it's because you're addicted to sex. But that's a very simple answer for a very complicated issue. And when we say you're addicted to sex, well, what's the answer? Stop. Just fucking stop. Just stop. But it didn't work when Nancy Reagan said, just say no. Dalton's not old enough to remember that. Nick and I are.
Oh, yeah.
It
did
not
not work
I
for
know
me.
about it.
And yeah, I mean, I remember those damn days. And you know, it didn't work then, and it doesn't work now. Just saying no and just stopping this issue isn't good enough. What I like to say is, you know, if I go into the doctor and I'm sneezing, my doctor doesn't say, David, you got a sneezing addiction. You need to stop that shit. Instead, my doctor tries to figure out, do I have a bacterial infection? Do I have allergies? Do I have a virus? We have to treat each one of those differently.
I'm making a list. You're not in denial of your murder addiction. And
That's right.
your sneezing addiction.
Or I fully accept my jiu-jitsu addiction, though.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. Grappling is really addictive. I mean, I use that language jokingly, but you know, there's no other places in modern life where men get to go in and be physical with each other, where we get to be aggressive in a safe and healthy way, where we get that kind of, you know, neurological, you know, stimulation. We get the brotherhood, and I say that even though I roll with lots of amazing female fighters and grapplers. Holly Holm works out with us a lot. Michelle Watterson, karate hottie, who just won a couple of weeks ago, she works out with us. But there's not a lot of places in our lives today where you get to do what you do on the mat.
That's true. Did you guys see the UFC last weekend?
Yep.
You know, I missed it. I was out, but it was two. Yeah, who was fighting?
There's two interim title fights, and there's one of them I wanted to mention between Max Holloway and Dustin Poirier. And fight of the night, they spent 5 rounds beating the shit out of each other, and then instantly after, both said, "I love you, dude," to the other one. It was an amazing moment. I tweeted about that.
That's really cool. I mean, you know, and I wrote this piece for Quillette magazine a couple of months ago about those issues. And I said, you know, the American Psychological Association has come out and said that, you know, men being aggressive and dominant and goal-focused is unhealthy and toxic masculinity. But those are the exact same things that make people successful in grappling and UFC and MMA. And there are some of the things that are some of the healthiest things. I've seen the same thing. I mean, my God, I love it when I roll with somebody and they challenge me, you know? And because that's them helping me be better. I don't want to roll with somebody that's just going to be, you know, oh, you know, do I have your consent to touch you? You know, I'm here to fight. Let's go.
I think you know, when I play video games online, I don't like a competitive match. I like a demonstration of efficacy. I like rolling with someone where I can do crazy, flashy shit. Like I can hit go-go's and stuff. That's probably not healthy.
Well, doing go-go plata, I don't know. Now, if you did the barata plata, that's pretty good. Actually, Barata is one of the guys I work with. He's one of my professors.
I have a training partner here who has a really cool Barata plata setup where I learned about it several years ago, and then no one did it to me. I didn't do it to anyone, and he does it from North-South Kimura, and it's a really easy entry.
Yeah, I can see that. Yeah, I can envision that. That's pretty cool. It's not one of my big games. I mean, I did nogi for a long, long time. And then when I started doing jiu-jitsu, I did, gi for about 10, 12 years. I've recently started getting more into nogi. But a lot of my game is based on the lapel, based on sleeve grips. I do a lot of foot locks. As I'm doing more nogi, I'm actually working at Jackson's now with disabled kids, and we've got a program where we teach MMA to kids with disabilities, which I wish I'd had as a kid. I was born with one hand, and I got the shit beat out of me everywhere until I got really good at fighting, and so I started fighting bullies. And now I get to teach those skills to these kids with disabilities, so they don't get bullied and harassed, which I love.
I mean, I just think of like Nick Newell,
Mm-hmm.
on one hand, good grappler.
Yeah.
Jeffrey Al, who's been in EBI a couple times, good.
Yeah.
Grappler.
My arm is almost exactly the same as Nick's. He and I are colleagues. We've never rolled together. I would love it. The only thing is I'm not a striker. I don't want to get kicked. I don't want to get punched. I'm just a grappler.
I'm the same way.
Yeah, getting your bell rung is not fun.
Yeah.
I make my living off my brain. I'm not interested in.
I did 5 or 6 years of Muay Thai, and I like it, and it's fun. I still work out in the bag, but yeah, I probably spar like once a year now just because concussions.
Yeah.
So who's the best grappler you've rolled with down in Albuquerque?
Oh, I mean, God, it's a long list. I mean, I roll pretty regularly with John Jones, Cowboy Cerrone, Diego Sanchez, Keith Jardine. There's this new guy on the mats, just signed with UFC recently, Roman Dolidze. He's a Russian fighter. Was a champion fighter in Russian MMA and just signed with UFC. And the guy's got some really crazy footlocks. I mean,
you mentioned that, that he had.
Yeah, he's almost unstoppable. And I'm interested to see what he does in the UFC. He's a hell of a fighter.
What weight class?
He's a big dude. I think he's in the same weight class as John Jones.
Okay.
And Jones is just, his wrestling skills are extraordinary. His physical agility is, just off the charts. I get to roll regularly with just insanely good people. I can't even say who the best is.
Is John insanely strong?
He's strong as hell, but I'll be honest, he's so quick that you almost don't notice how strong he is. Keith Jardine is probably the strongest dude I've ever rolled with. Keith, one time we were rolling and he just casually brushed my face with the back of his hand, and my nose hurt for the next 2 or 3 days. The guy's just got so much unbelievable power. It's extraordinary.
Wow.
Who's the best? Who's the guy who wrecked you the worst of anyone you've ever rolled with, Dalton?
Pat.
Jack?
Pat.
Okay. Yeah. He's one of our coaches at Salt Lake Grappling Club, but not Amir. Amir's a guy who trained there for a while, who's a 270-pound 10th planet black belt, has been to ADCC and EBI.
Mm-hmm.
Quintet. Yeah, he's a tough out.
Yeah, there's a dude I roll with. He's a blue belt from Brazil, and he's 6'8", 300 pounds.
Jesus
and
Christ.
Rolling with that guy, it feels like David and Goliath. And if you tap him out, it's just I walk around grinning for days. Now when I was in Salt Lake City a couple of years ago, I did roll at a jiu-jitsu school there. I forget which one. It wasn't a grappling club. I think it was down south, kind of southwest area of town or something like that. But good time. the neat thing is, I mean, jiu-jitsu is kind of popping up everywhere. You know, when I travel on business now, I pretty regularly, you know, I take my gi, I take my nogi stuff and fit in a role, you know, if I can. And everybody's always happy to see me. I'm a little worried though. I might start traveling with my brown belt instead of my black, because when I show up with a black belt, you know, everybody just wants a piece of me and wants to see, is he really a black belt?
You know, if you just wanted to roll no gi, you wouldn't have to pack a gi. I'm just saying.
Yeah, I like both options. And I'll be honest, I mean, nogi is a lot of fucking work, man. I mean, jumping around and yeah, I mean, with the gi, I can slow things down and rest for a little while.
I would think you would want to do nogi more to save your fingers with your one hand. If you're grabbing collars and sleeves, and guys get fucked up fingers from the gi.
Well, so here's my trick: is that I use my arm. I use the end of my arm. I wrap it inside the sleeve or inside the collar,
okay.
And I get an unbelievably strong grip.
Oh yeah, way stronger than fingers. Okay.
Because the rule is, right? The rule is no fingers inside the gi. Hey baby, I got no fingers. I'm not putting any fingers inside the gi. I don't know what your problem is. And yeah, it is it's one of the strongest grips most people have ever felt. And I get some really extraordinary game out of it.
Interesting.
Last year I was in Vietnam, and I rolled at Saigon BJJ. It was fun.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, and tomorrow, actually, speaking of Japan, I'm going to Japan for 10 days.
Oh, how cool.
Yeah. And so I've already got, from my coach in Berkeley, I already got a place to train on there. So
nice. That'd be awesome. I've trained in Australia, but nowhere else. Yeah, it's very, you know, I mean, again, I think it's, I think jiu-jitsu and grappling and the rise of this is really healthy. I wish more people did it. And I wish people didn't paint it as this kind of, you know, macho man just being nasty and aggressive, because, you know, you guys have seen those same people come into the gym as I have, that, you know, come in and they have to swagger because they think their balls are so big. And then they get on the mat and they try and hurt people. Yeah. And so we shut them down, you know, and you either learn to deal with humility in that situation, or you go away.
Yeah. I've just seen most of those guys get run off.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. You know, and the guys who come in and they're really rough with a female grappler. Yeah. And it's like, what the fuck are you doing? You know, and, you know, most schools, I'm one of them, have a guy or some guys that will go in and, you know, shut that guy down, to see if they can learn to control themselves. And if they can't, they're not so welcome.
I've really never had very few training partners who were too rough for just that reason. The people who were either got shut down or run off.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you know, that's a big piece of it. I mean, now I'm not saying jiu-jitsu doesn't have its problems. I mean, we've got, you know, a history of jiu-jitsu schools with sexual offense and sexual assault and sexual harassment happening. But I think some of that's going to kind of happen everywhere. There's a lot of really powerful, good stuff that, again, it's one of the places I think where guys can go to learn to be men.
I agree. So I guess there's one thing that I wanted to add, looping back. I could honestly talk to you for a long time about many things, David.
Totally. I got to wrap it up here shortly, though.
Okay. Yeah, fair enough. Maybe we can do this again in a couple of years down the road. So the one thing I wanted to say is you threaded the needle about marriage and relationships in a way I try to, but few people do. You go in the public conversations about marriage and you have people on the right, like Jordan Peterson, talking about its benefits. And then you have people on the left who are delivering important messages about sexuality, but you combine both of them. So I think that's great. Few people do that publicly.
Yeah, I mean, I am much more of a centrist. I recognize the value of morality and religion and spirituality, and yet at the same time, I recognize the damage and the dangers of shame. I'll be honest. I think that my anger with a lot of conservative attitudes towards sexuality and marriage and everything else is kind of the same as my anger towards a lot of the left who, if you don't do it or believe the way they do, you're wrong, and they're going to shame you for it. And, there's a reason I got my degree in philosophy, because in philosophy, you've got to be willing to think about ideas, and you got to be willing to evaluate them. You got to be able to look at them objectively. And I don't think there's enough of that right now.
I agree.
And
Obama just said that, right?
Yeah.
About the what did he say? The circular firing squad or circular firing squad of purity.
Absolutely, yeah. Circular firing squad of purity is the thing that's killing the Democratic Party right now. Boy, I couldn't agree more. I mean, we've got to be able to disagree and talk about it. I mean, some of my good friends hold, political beliefs that I really don't agree with, but we're able to talk about them. Instead of unfriending them or calling them a monster or a Nazi or a SJW or whatever. Let's just stop, shaming people for having ideas that we may not share.
It's, in fact, coming back to jiu-jitsu. I've met people with very different political beliefs than me that I'm friendly with through jiu-jitsu. It's great.
Yeah, that's interesting. I agree. I mean, I can't talk about politics with some of the people I work out with, but they're my very good friends that I love to roll with.
Yeah.
And that's okay.
Yep. Dalton, anything you want to add?
Well, just to add on to what you guys just talked about, me and Nick, I mean, I'm not very educated when it comes to politics, but we differ pretty, I don't know if severely is the right word, but, we have some major differences in political beliefs, but we're still friends and we can talk about it on our podcast, and we'd love to try and strangle each other.
I don't try to strangle you. I just try to break your small heels.
Shave them every night.
He has small heels. He's hard to heel hook.
Yeah, I do not love heel hooks. That's one thing I'm not a huge fan of in nogi is, heel hooks hurt, man. and you walk funny for days.
You don't have good training partners. I mean, that shouldn't happen.
Yeah, if they stop it soon enough. I mean, I will say one of the neat things working out at Jackson's is that, I regularly get to roll with people from all over the world. I mean, when I go there in one night, I'll roll with somebody from Russia, somebody from Ireland, somebody from Australia, somebody from, Honduras, I'm just all over the world. These fighters come in to train at Jackson's, and they've even got a dorm where they'll come in and they'll stay there for a couple of weeks just working out to get ready for a fight. And it is wicked cool, and it's really neat to get to train with all these different people. And there's this one guy I work out with from Mongolia, and the guy's
a Mongolian training partner,
and the guy's got like 3 English words.
Yeah.
But we love to roll together and communicate through that language. I think it's extraordinary.
Yeah, I like to tell guys, grappling will ruin you for all the earthly pleasures: sex, marijuana, video games. All right. This has been great. Thanks, Dave.
Hey, I've enjoyed it. Nice talking with both of you. Dalton, Nicholas, thanks for having me.
Thank you for being on.
Yep.
You could post the file right away?
Yeah, I'll. I think it takes a minute to record, so I might not get to send it to you until tomorrow. But your listeners can find me on Twitter at Dr. David Ley. Last name is Ley.
Okay, and I'll certainly tweet this out once it's in. Yeah, sooner the
Excellent.
better. You can get that to me would be awesome. Thank you so much.
Great. Hey, thanks you. Nice talking to you, Dalton. Have a great night, guys.
Yeah. Oh, and one last thing. Plug
Yeah.
your books that you've written so people can check them out.
Sure. My first book is Insatiable Wives. Second book is called The Myth of Sex Addiction. And the third is called Ethical Porn for Dicks, A Man's Guide to Responsible Viewing Pleasure. And I wrote that book specifically for all those guys named Richard out there who watch a lot of porn.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hey, you guys have a great night. Bye.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Professor and the Idiot. If you like what you heard, go to Apple Podcasts and give us a good rating so that others may find us and we can expand our social media juggernaut. And if you didn't like it, fuck off to the place you came from.